This is the One More Mission podcast from justiceforveterans.uk. Chances are the legacy debate may get lost in the media noise around the run. But the media is not the primary battlefield here. Local constituencies are. MPs are briefed by the government on Northern Ireland issues. It is not until veterans tell them the truth that they will take action. We talked to former Parachute Regiment Lieutenant Colonel Simon Barry about Hilary Benn's muddle-headedness on the issues, the work of a small group in Cornwall calling itself a fighting patrol, which has set the model for how to approach MPs, and the importance of opening up local fronts. Firstly, Simon, Hilary Benn seems to think we were not at war with the IRA. Why do you think he's so confused about all this?
Both Hilary Benn and the Northern Ireland office, from people who've had meetings with them, feel that they really don't completely understand what it was like then. They have been given narratives from various politically interested parties and so on. But the difficulty they have is putting it into the context of the time. And that's really where we've got to base all our discussions. It's what it was like then, not what it may have been like in hindsight. So there is a view that it wasn't really a military operation and it was something sort of somewhat abstract. And that's total nonsense. When bullets are flying around, bombs are going off, people are firing mortars, people are shooting helicopters down, people are just killing people indiscriminately, and you've got soldiers out there trying to stop it. It is a military operation, and anybody who thinks it isn't is frankly foolish. The fact that the IRA called themselves an army implies that they thought they were doing military operations. So people certainly were doing military operations, and it was done at times with that form of intensity. It doesn't matter whether a bullet comes in the middle of World War III or it comes around in West Belfast, it can still kill you. So people need to get that into their heads and maybe understand the context of it better, and do that by talking to people. And I know exactly where this is going to lead us, because the best people to describe to those who need to understand this context for the work that they are doing in the political arena are those that were there. And in those days, it was the 18, 19-year-old soldier, and it was him who bore the brunt of it all. It was mainly him. There were a few hers, and they operated bloody well too, but that's him. He is now your veteran. It's the same person. So people need to listen to this. And this is where the actions of certainly the gang in Cornwall have been particularly successful, because they are getting out with the aim of making certain that people who are prepared to listen, and that's, of course, fairly key, listen to them and get to understand what it was really like. And then they are better informed, because otherwise, they just get played by the party whips and everyone with an axe to grind. And ultimately, we feel that they have let their own constituents down because they didn't do enough homework. So it behoves the veterans in those constituencies, like I think they call themselves the Cornwall Fighting Patrol. And I might get some people clutching their pearls, but it tells you what it is. They're getting out, getting stuck in and getting the job done. Doesn't mean to say they're hurting anybody. They're just going in to do something, doing it, get the message across, move on. And that's very proactive. And that's great. I mean, one of the problems we have is that, in any organization, and the military is always the same, you've got those who get up and get going. You've got those who, get going with them a bit later on. You've got those who've got more inertia to overcome. So there will always be those who are, irrespective of rank or status or anything, the get up and go merchants, and then those who sort of come along afterwards. And really what we need to do is to empower the get up and go merchants to follow this fantastic example. And that is what we will do over the coming few days.
This is going to be a busy week for Op Banner veterans. Monday, we have the trial of Jerry Adams in London. Wednesday, there is set to be a debate in the House of Lords. And on Friday the 13th, Keir Starmer and several UK ministers will head to Cork for the second UK-Ireland summit. All this will bring Northern Ireland back into the public consciousness. Now, many veterans are following the legacy debate closely, but quite a few are doing so from the sidelines. From your perspective, Simon, how important is it that veterans move from commentary to direct engagement?
Well, commentary is letting someone else do something and you can talk about it. Direct engagement is just that. And as I say, those who are prepared to get up and go, I think we are getting to almost a watershed moment. So now is the time to engage. And I know we've been pushing it out in the past on the website and so on, but really it is the time to take that dynamic action. Not everyone's going to do it. Not everyone feels comfortable doing it. But those who are prepared to put their head above the parapet, and there are a lot, and you will have met a lot of them. I met a hell of a lot of them at Westminster in November. Maybe we need to help with the ammunition that they're going to use and the material they're going to use and so on, so they understand the lines to take and they understand what they are trying to achieve. But ultimately, they're the best people to tell the story. If you want to tell someone and make them understand the context of what was happening 40, 50 years ago, it's the person who was there. They may not be the most articulate people in the world, but that really, really doesn't matter. They'll get their message across and they can answer questions. And, if you want to know what it was like on the streets in the 70s, on the border in the 70s, picking bits of people up and all that sort of stuff, go and ask somebody who was there. They'll tell you all about it. And that means you can avoid the nonsense from the spin doctors. So I think over the next few days, one of the things that we'll be doing is getting out and getting to some of the veterans with, what is your idea? Where do you want to go? And so on. What do you think you need to say? What support do you need? The website gives everyone the sort of basic data information that they need to do this. And then just encourage them, look, guys, the clock's ticking. It is now time to get to your MP surgery or whatever. You have a perfect example in the Cornwall Fighting Patrol. So, prepare for action and get going.
A group in Cornwall has been meeting MPs and pressing concerns directly to Parliament. What do you think of that approach?
Well, they all have their part to play, particularly in setting the scene to the general public and so on. But ultimately, this is now a political process. And the people involved in that political process are the people who sit in Parliament. And it always helps when your legislators are better informed than they may otherwise be, particularly from their own constituents. And if a constituent sits down and says, look, your government seems to be rather keen in the expression is selling us down the river or whatever. But you probably need to understand what it was really like. And I'm here to tell you, and if you are prepared to listen to me and ask me any questions, I will give you all the information that I possibly can without fear or favour. That then allows that person to actually contribute a much better and reasoned line to any form of debate. And we saw in the debate on the 18th of November, I think it was, the paucity of understanding on the government benches. And it was shocking, frankly. They'd been fed a line, and that line continued, and some of them made even more sort of self-centered arguments about various things, but very few of them demonstrated any real understanding of the constituency in which this has taken place in terms of veterans and so on, and in terms of what the whole thing was about. So they are therefore open to all sorts of propaganda, all sorts of spin coming from people and so on, and the deceit that comes out of various arms of government. It is interesting, there was an article in the Mail this week, which you'll undoubtedly have read, and the MOD spokesman said yet again, that the Legacy Act was shown to be unlawful by the courts. It was not, and we've had this discussion with the minister himself, and he acknowledged the fact that it was one judge in one court on one aspect of this particular act that he questioned. He didn't say it was unlawful and nobody else did. And yet the MOD is still trotting out that deceitful line. And this is the sort of thing that we need to be able to counter by getting people out there who are able to tell the truth. And really, it is now, the truth of what it was like when I was there, because that's what this whole issue is all about. And the spinning of it for political purposes by people who would like the history to be more divorced from the truth than it already is.
There are veterans in almost every constituency in the country, and of course, some of these backbenchers are first time politicians. What opportunity is there for veterans to make their voices heard locally? And indeed, what is their duty to do so?
To an extent, it's kind of up to them because it's in their self-interest if they don't want to be getting hounded and hounded and hounded. And it's also the fact that, we come from a gang that sort of sticks together no matter what tribe you used to be in. Just look at the groups that muster on Parliament Green when things are going on. They come from all regiments, corps, backgrounds or whatever. It really doesn't matter. And so those who are prepared, excuse me, Rob, pardon, those who are prepared to get up and go, as we discussed earlier, the best thing they can do is to engage and to engage positively with their MP. I know that, for instance, in Aldershot, the guy from the Parachute Regiment Association, Ian Barraclough, has had a number of meetings with the new MP for Aldershot and has explained to her at some length, what it's all about and what it was like. And to give her some credit, she has sat and listened to this, and she even came to one of the meetings we had in the House of Commons because someone engaged with her and she realised that she was actually quite exposed on this whole issue. And so whilst Aldershot, is a garrison town and many towns aren't, but there are still areas in Britain where you have quite a large constituency of people who served, people who are family of people who served, people who are proud of the family and the people who served and so on. And it gets quite big. If you want to say, there's only so many veterans, yes, but when you factor in mum, dad, uncles, cousins and so on, all of whom feel that, Uncle so-and-so was a good guy, he was a soldier and we're very proud of him, that number gets much, much bigger. And therefore it becomes much, much more significant. So just getting the veterans out there with that implicit and my family and friends and so on. So it's not just me speaking to you who your actions are going to affect. It is quite a large group of people who are associated with me who want you to listen to what I've got to say.
Why do you think some parts of the veteran community have become more passive or resigned about these issues?
I think it's a bit like, it comes to an extent through personality. It just takes a couple of guys to stand up and say, let's go. And then people go, let's go. And then if someone doesn't stand up and say, let's go, then people sort of wait for it to happen. And some people are more dynamic than others. And equally, I do think there has been a slightly sinister campaign being waged by the MOD to try and intimidate particularly regimental associations, and to stop them being involved in this sort of thing. And as most veterans will look first to their regimental association, by hamstringing that regimental association, the government is in effect trying to muffle what people are doing and trying to discourage them from doing it because they're the natural initial focal point. So it then comes down to actually the members of the association who are not publicly funded, they're guys doing it for themselves, and the regional secretaries and so on. And they're the people that we really need. They're the people who actually give of their own time and effort freely to help organise things and do things. And we're talking to quite a few people in various regimental associations who are quite driven. But of course, they can only get to so many. And so the association itself being slightly hamstrung, as I've said, it makes it difficult. And some are intimidated, and because at the end of the day, they're paid by the government, they're paid by the taxpayer, they're paid by the MOD. And others are less intimidated. I think we've just put it that way, really.
Some may think, well, it's just all a waste of time. I mean, you've spoken to MPs and written to ministers. Tell us about your experience of engaging with them.
If they answer, and I'll give Al Khan's his due, he did answer my first letter. I don't know who scripted the response, but anyway, he had the decency to respond or get the response and to sign it. Others, like the Veterans Minister, for instance, hasn't even bothered to acknowledge that she got it, let alone respond. So the the more committed MPs in terms of government, career, and so on, I think it's quite difficult. I think I would be wasting my time and the ink if I wrote to Hilary Benn or anybody in the NIO. And this is where I think it's quite important that the guys who are, the people from being on the ground at the time get and talk to their MPs. They have that local connection, and there is something in it for both of them. Whereas if I write a letter to whoever, Louise Sander Jones, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? So it just goes in the bin and off she goes to do something else. And so I think the whole thing is doing what you're doing and targeting it best for the best effect, and simply firing letters off to people and tweeting to people who aren't going to even listen or just see your name on something and automatically bin it is a bit of a waste of time. So what we've got to do is, how do we best get the message to where we want to get it? And that's why I think this whole Cornwall example is such a good example, because we've seen it in action. They've got 4 MPs that they have actually managed to get to think that there is something in this I need to engage. And that is achieving so much more than letters, fire it off, wait 2 weeks, nothing happens, and I might fire another one off. No. Close with the person you need to discuss this with, speak to them, and have that effect as soon as you can, and then move on to the next one. So I think this direct engagement now for that particular level is particularly good. There are also the other media that go into it that senior politicians will read, and their advisors will read and maybe sensitive to, and so on, because that is a sort of explanation of where the thinking is going in certain parts of the country and so on. So they're all very complementary. But I think right now, the more we can get the troops on the ground out to talk to people who are reliant upon them to get back into Parliament if they want to, then they will pay attention. Unless they're ideologically compromised, in which case, sorry guys, you're wasting your breath.
The Cornwall group describes their work as applying constant pressures, small interventions that accumulate over time. They're sending letters asking for meetings, even getting their local council to send letters to Hilary Benn and the Veterans Minister. In other words, they keep punching the bruise. You've sent a letter to the Veterans Minister and she's completely ignored it. But it is a bit harder for ministers to ignore letters and approaches from their own colleagues and from local councils. What would happen if similar groups appeared in 20 or 30 constituencies across the country?
I think it would have the best effect that we could hope for, because the only way that we are going to win this battle is for the governing party to realise that it's actually eased itself onto the wrong side of history, and it's probably the politics that then they realise may not be playing out in their favour. Pandering to Sinn Féin and pandering to the government of the Republic and all that sort of stuff might look very good in various bits of the world stage or wherever else you want to put yourself forward. But when it comes down to cutthroat electoral calculation, that's not going to get you very many votes at all. Whereas if you are seen by, some good working class guys in the constituency to have let people down, that is going to, your electoral calculus then goes the other way. What's in it for me if this passes? Not very much. What's in it for me if, it doesn't pass and, the people in my constituency who have been to see me feel that that's a good thing. It didn't pass. We are, drawing a line under things at last, and we're removing all the threats of vexatious legislation from 60, 70-year-old guys who just did their duty. Then the calculation is simple. So that's really what we want to bring to front and centre of people like, the various MPs that people in Cornwall have spoken to. They understand that now. They get it. They kind of need it to be explained to them, because otherwise they're just going, we need to follow the party line. Well, if following the party line is going to hack off a large chunk of your constituency, then you're going to look again.
This is about the political process, not politics. It's not about whether it is a vote for this party or that. What does the current legacy process represent, really?
Well, For a start, one has to question why it's in there in the first place and why it became a manifesto commitment. And yes, we strive desperately to stay apolitical, but ultimately we are in a situation where the government of the day is taking action that is against the best interests of veterans and so on, and knowingly so. And that then subsequently they have been pretty deceitful in, oh, we brought in these safeguards. Well, no, you haven't. You've just watered down the old ones and you're wrapping them up and pretending they're new ones and so on. And so that is part of the difficulty. But we are where we are. And ultimately, when you can sit down with MPs, and I've sat down with quite a few of them, including Al Khan's, and explained what you've gone there to explain to them. They're quite interested. They listen. They ask questions. Some people don't. Some people do. But a lot of them are not willfully ignorant. To a lot of MPs, this isn't important. And that's why having some veterans coming into your constituency surgery saying, look, you might be thinking about this, you may be thinking about that. I need you to think about this because this is important to a large chunk of your constituency. It's not the biggest chunk, but it's a big chunk. And if you keep losing chunks of your constituency, guess what? The electoral sums will sort you out. So getting people's attention is important. And one of the problems you've got with certain MPs, and we saw it in the debate on the 18th of November, is some of them are so ideologically wound up about this. You're just talking to the wall. Forget it. That they want to see, the army pilloried for the rest of its existence until it's ultimately disbanded in the brave new world that they espouse. And that's not good. But I think you have to realise that there are some people who it is always going to be like talking to the wall. So forget it. Put your effort into people who are going to give you a hearing, who are generally decent people and just need to be better informed about the whole context of what went on and why people did what they did all that time ago. And particularly now with this coming week with Jerry Adams trying to sort of airbrush his reputation yet again in court, and then with the Prime Minister going to Cork on Friday the 13th, how appropriate, to have a sort of summit with the Irish government. That does not bode particularly well, because I think most people in the room in Cork will be trying to sing off a very similar song sheet, and that song sheet won't have very much on it that would come from people like us. You will have the Prime Minister, you will probably have the Northern Ireland office, you'll have Hilary Benn, you'll have a load of guys from the Irish Republic's government and so on. You may have Jonathan Powell, whose fingerprints are over the original agreement and so on. And so no one is going in there to go, let's make certain that this is a decent outcome for the veterans as well, because the Irish government has already said that if there's any sort of provision to help veterans, that they are not going to agree to it. So there's a simple calculation. You either sell the veterans down the river or you don't get an agreement. And if you're after something that looks good on the world stage and makes you look more statesmanlike, then I think we know how difficult that may be for our interests.
From a veteran's point of view, it just seems so deeply personal. Why is it so personal to those who served?
I think, we've all been in various places where you've had to put a round up the spout or whatever. I think what makes it personal for a lot of us is the fact that this took place in the United Kingdom. It took place in a democracy. The cynical Adams who talks about the Armalite or the ballot box, I'm operating in a democracy, and if I don't get what I want, then I'm going to go around and start killing people, which kind of goes against the whole democratic idea. And the fact that that was happening, where you had all the things around you, the props of a normal British society, apart from the fact you had policemen carrying guns and all that sort of stuff. But everything else, if you took the accents out of it and you took some of the graffiti out of it, you could have been in many, many different towns in the United Kingdom. And yet here you were in the United Kingdom and people were going out and just slaughtering people because they could justify it to themselves, because some of them pervertedly enjoyed it and so on. So that to me is something that I think shocked us all, really. And then the sort of propaganda, the justification, and someone again like Jerry Adams piously intoning that the latest bunch of people the IRA have blown to pieces were all legitimate targets. Well, in whose eyes? Everyone loves talking about international law. Well, I can't think of anything in international law that covered anything that the IRA did at all. I know Lord Hermer has a relationship with Jerry Adams, but in spite of that. And so I think all of us felt that we just wanted to be able to stop it and to let people go on with living the lives of, peace and common sense that the vast majority of them wanted to do. And let's not forget also that both sides of the terrorist spectrum, both the loyalists, who are a bunch of scumbags, and also the IRA, were also inextricably connected to organised crime and all that sort of stuff, protection rackets, and generally making life thoroughly miserable for the communities that they purported to represent. And you had an overstretched but fundamentally decent police force being demonized by the propaganda arm of the Republicans, but fundamentally decent men and women working really hard to try and achieve that end of a peaceful life for people who deserved it. And those people who set out to kill, maim and murder just because it satisfied some sort of urge to have a place in some sort of perverted history, frankly, were then beyond the pale, to use a good Irish expression, and frankly remain beyond the pale. We went there to do that job. I think most of us did it to the best of our ability. A lot of us died doing it, and a lot more were wounded doing it. But I think if we had to go back and do it again, we'd do it again in exactly the same way. Because guess what? It worked. We beat them, and they didn't like it.
What would you say to veterans watching events unfold but unsure whether getting involved locally would make a difference?
The time for action, there is a time, and it is now. Don't wait. Get up, get on with it, get going. You can't, if you want to stay on the sidelines, then by all means do, and accept whatever comes down afterwards. If you want to stand up and be counted, then now is definitely the time to do so. If you want support, then you know where to find it on the Justice for Veterans website. All that support you want, any direction, any advice, we'll all come and back you up completely. And if you're prepared to put your head above the parapet, we're prepared to help.
Finally, Simon, do you have a message for that Cornwall fighting patrol?
Well, A, extremely well done. And B, get your sort of after action report out to as many other groups and individuals as you possibly can around the country, saying, look, guys, this is how we did it. It worked. How about giving it a go yourself?
This is the One More Mission podcast from justiceforveterans.uk.